Hello everyone, and welcome to another live episode of Wednesday Night Live. Simon Jacobson is my name. I welcome you all, both those of you who are here physically, souls inside bodies that I can see, and those that I can't see in cyberspace. It's always an honor to share a few words. And tonight's topic is somewhat of, I would say, a controversial one. It's about obnoxiousness. And we titled it, "Can a Religious Person Be Obnoxious?" And the reason I chose this topic is, firstly, because of its relevance. Unfortunately, many people who claim to be religious do behave in ways that are obnoxious. Not all, but a number. This doesn't mean that religion has a monopoly on obnoxiousness. People can be obnoxious and not have any faith at all. But obviously it's much more glaring and more disturbing when someone of faith who claims to believe in God and follow God's moral laws, you would expect refinement, you would expect sensitivity, empathy. When you see instead, you see condescension and judgment and all the other negative synonyms that go with often religious dogma or religious fanaticism. It can be very disturbing. And I personally, of course, and maybe this is my main reason of talking about it, is because I personally have suffered at the brunt of this, because when I travel and I speak, and you look at me, so I'm a man with a beard and a yarmulke, and the fact is, even though people don't like to say this, but we all stereotype, so I'm also stereotyped. So I've developed a comprehensive and elaborate system of responses to how to diffuse this type of stereotyping. I'll just give you an example. When my book was published, Torah Meaning for Life, originally in 1995, it's a long time ago. It was before emails even. There was just AOL, CompuServe, and Prodigy were the three newborn infant AOL providers, email providers. Most of us didn't even know what email was. I had to actually be persuaded to put an email address in my book, because I didn't even know what it was. I said, "There's enough, problems. I don't need another email problem." But then, obviously, we had to live in a different world. So I remember I was, I believe it was, which city was it? Maybe Cleveland. I was on the publisher had sent me on a book tour, an author book tour. And that comes along with, besides signing and speaking in bookstores across the country, also doing media, radio, TV, and print interviews. So I was on an interview in a Cleveland morning drive show, morning drive. So it's like a short interview. These interviews usually go 5-10 minutes, not longer. And I remember when I came on the show, this was all live, so it was all spontaneous, no time for corrections. So the woman who was interviewing me, immediately as soon as I came on the set, she visibly, on camera, that was like demonstrated and exhibited real shock. She looked at me, and she said, "I'm surprised to see this is what you look like. I'd read your book, and I love your book. It's one of my favorite books, Torah Meaning for Life. It touched me deeply. And seeing you, I'm a little shocked." She said that. So I said, "What are you so shocked about?" She said, "I didn't expect you to look like this." So I said, "Like what?" She said, "With a beard and a kippah and all that." And then she asked me that, wouldn't it be people would be more receptive to me if I looked more like a regular secular guy in the street? That was her question, her first question to me. So obviously I was, even though I wasn't offended, but I make believe I was offended, because it was a good opportunity to make a point. So I said, I'm very offended by that. Would I suggest to you that you should look in any different way because it's to be more acceptable? This is my tradition, this is my choice. And on the contrary, maybe this is a good opportunity to provoke you and your audience to look at how we stereotype. You don't even know me. You read my book. Maybe I am like my book. Who says my book is like me? Maybe what you read is a reflection of who I truly am. Anyway, she accepted that, and she apologized. It wasn't a true offense. I was just, as I said, and this happens to me quite often. People read, and people have read stuff that I've written, and then they meet you, and they don't always associate the two. Which maybe is a good reason not to always meet everyone that reads you, because that way they can't disappoint them. But hopefully I have not disappointed, even if you meet me. So maybe it is a good opportunity to, even though the cliche is, we don't want to judge a book by its cover, but everybody does judge a book by its cover, let's be honest. That's why billions of dollars are spent on covers, and on packaging, and on marketing, and on presenting things. Because people judge things by the first 5 seconds. So for me personally, this has been I would call it pet peeve. It's a painful subject, but at the same time, I think it's a critical subject, because how do we address this issue? When you see, for example, the examples in Israel, streaming videos of religious people spitting on each other, or spitting at someone they think is underdressed, which may or may not be the case. And it creates these images which feed a stereotype, unfortunately, of this type of religious obnoxiousness. And then when you add into the equation what's been going on in recent years, Muslim fundamentalism, so there, of course, it takes on a whole different level. It's actual suicide bombing and killing. But it all feeds into that image of this negative taste about religion. And we all know this isn't new. The last 200 years have really been an assault on religious authority, whether it's the battle between science and religion, or between faith and reason. In the modern age, if you read the Enlightenment, thinkers of the Enlightenment, so they and others who began to so-called free themselves from the shackles of religious authority, the church, the monarchs, that really ruled Europe for close to 1,500 years, until, even more than that, until so-called the age of reason. The Enlightenment began to challenge that authority. And I would argue that it was actually a good challenge. It may have gone too far, the other extreme, but it did challenge corrupt authority. When authority is in a few people's hands, no matter what you call them, whether you call them religious or whatever they are, it can get quite corrupt, and it did get corrupt. So in a way, the Enlightenment was like a market correction. So when Nietzsche said God is dead, as he made very obvious, talking about a God that was never alive, that was never deserved to be alive. So in a sense, it was like revealing the emperor without no clothes. And if you left it up to the thinkers of the Enlightenment, they would tell you that a few hundred years from then, from the 18th, 17th, 18th century, there will be no more religion, or only for a few inferior people. But they were incorrect, because with all the entire assault on faith and religion, and for many good reasons, it still remains a force. And not just a force, like you look at the biggest selling book in all of history, and remains the biggest selling book, more than all the books on the New York Times bestseller combined, is called the Bible. So clearly religion hasn't gone nowhere. It's still here, very strong. So we have the radical atheists, we have the radical believers. And the question is, the silent majority, most of us, where are we left with? Clearly science and rationale and reason does not solve all our problems. The bigger issues, existential questions, issues of pain, of love, of relationships, the things that are the sublime areas of life, science cannot say much about it. Science has given us tremendous tools, has accelerated communications, unity, I mean not in a spiritual sense, unity in the sense of connecting to anyone, anywhere, anytime. The advances in medicine, in biology, in genetic engineering, whatever it may be, there's tremendous advancements. But we should not get deluded, as I discussed, I believe, last week in different classes. Just because we have tremendous progress in one area, that doesn't mean we've progressed as human beings in our relationships. Do we have healthier relationships? Are we better at emotional communication? Are we more mature? Are we spiritually more refined? Not necessarily. And in a way, when there's such great progress on one end, in a way it becomes even more problematic, because the other side of us still remains as human as we were 1,000 years ago. And we cry and we laugh and we need the same issues, and we deal with truth and deception and duplicity and love and hate and jealousies and pettiness That hasn't changed. Technology does not change it. If anything, it just accelerates everything. So it magnifies also pettiness. And if you have gossip, once was in a shtetl between 5 people, now it's 5 million people. So everything is magnified. But going back to the topic, what is the place of faith and religion in our lives is very complicated. I grew up in a traditional Jewish home. Some of you may have. Some of you may not have. Are we basically, is our destiny defined by where we grew up and essentially culturally programmed to be a certain person and really never break free of that cultural programming? And if you grew up in an unhealthy religious environment, I don't know if you're either trapped by it or you're running the other extreme, you're running away from it. How many people have rejected religion because it was abusive? And in the process thrown out the baby on the bathwater. Meaning all the benefits that faith and God may bring to a person's life, when it's presented to you in a very angry and dogmatic and abusive fashion, obviously you reject it. But then what are you left with? What's the alternative? So these are all the questions I'd like to address. I don't know if I'll address everything, but it's a wide spectrum of issues. But above all, as I was going back to the issue of religion and what it expects of us. To me, it's the most desecrating thing. And it's not just to me. The Torah's perspective, there's a concept called Kiddush Hashem, to sanctify God's name. And there's the opposite, Chil Hashem, to desecrate God's name. What does this mean? This is considered one of the greatest crimes and one of the greatest mitzvahs. And you don't hear about it that much. We hear about Shabbat, kosher, mikvah, mezuzah, tefillin, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah. But there's a mitzvah called Kiddush Hashem, which is really the theme of these chapters in the Torah, which is another reason I'm discussing it. Kiddush Hashem means that you as a human being, created in the divine image, have an obligation and a responsibility and a gift, an opportunity to sanctify God, being that God created you in His image. So when you live up to that mandate, to that legacy, and you're a living example of what it means to be a refined, godly person, you sanctify God. And if you behave in a way that is obnoxious, you defile God, and you defile what God represents, and such you desecrate God. And we have that power. We have that power. Because we are the examples. God is invisible. So a person who claims they have faith in God, the first responsibility is, are you godlike? And if you behave in a way that is not godlike, then it's much worse than if you were not claiming faith. Then at least you're not a representative. You don't believe, or you're agnostic, or you're neutral, whatever the word is, undecided. Like the guy that said, I used to think I was undecided, now I'm not so sure. Any of you in that category? As we get older, we become less decided or more decided. It's a category now, pollsters take. Decided, yes, no, or undecided. So if you're in a position like that, okay, so in a sense you're on the sideline. But if you're a representative or consider yourself to be a person of faith and people look at you as such, you have great responsibility. There's a story in the Talmud that speaks about a great sage. And when he'd go buy meat, buy any product, he would never buy on credit. Even though credit was an acceptable method of payment back then as well. What's wrong with buying on credit? Because people looked at him as a great sage, and he did not want anyone to ever think that he's leaving the store without paying. That's an impression. Even though you can assume maybe he's paying credit, but who knows what someone will interpret. That's the level of sensitivity. It's called a real Kiddush Hashem. So this is the standard. Now this seems so logical. So then the question is, why there's so many people who claim to be religious and behave that way and are the exact opposite in their example. They don't make you want to feel that you want to be part of this. They don't make you feel proud. As a matter of fact, you're embarrassed. And I include myself. Sometimes I see pictures in the newspapers, certain people arrested and so on. It's greatly disturbing to me because, firstly, as I said, it reflects on what I believe in and even my own look, so to speak. And then, of course, when you see a person that's supposed to be a godly person behave that way, it's far more problematic. Now, I understand the defenses, we're all humans, and so why should people who are religious be held up to a higher standard? They are, because you've chosen to be held up to a higher standard. So, So I'm not justifying those that stereotype and hate religion for their own particular reasons and use all these things as excuses. You don't need to read anything more obscene than Mein Kampf and some other anti-Semitic literature. You see how they completely distort, even basing it on some legitimate stereotype, because that's another extreme, which is perhaps even worse than what they're criticizing. It is worse than what they're criticizing. But I'm talking about between normal people who are really looking to find a peaceful or some type of appropriate path in life. So this is an issue that I think is a critical, important issue for all of us, how to look at it, how to be, how to come away from it, and what should be our reaction when we see stuff like this. And as I said, beyond the fact that it's such a timely issue in general, and also a cause for great strife and divisiveness, especially among Jews. Because one of the biggest splits in Jewish life is between what they call the Charedim and the Chilonim. The Charedim in Hebrew mean the ultra-religious, ultra-orthodox, and the Chilonim are the secular. To the point of, I don't like to use the word, but hatred. Definitely distrust. In Israel, it's very blatant. In the United States, it may be a little more milder, but it's still there. It's a fundamental cutoff, the dichotomy between the two. And I'll give you another example. I was once invited to speak to a group of philanthropists in America, American Jewish philanthropists, who give to Jewish causes. So they have different collectives where they get together, they discuss projects, and so on and so forth. A very interesting thing took place. They asked me to speak because I guess one of the people there had heard me or knew me, and they wanted me to address a certain issue about the future of philanthropy, what I thought, and so on. So I shared with them an observation. I said to them, there's something, it's a little sensitive, but I'll share it anyway because I think it's important. And we're here among family, and it's 7 billion people, our family, right? Who are they going to tell? God? There's no one left, Once it's on YouTube, everybody can see it. So I was discussing this issue, which I found very interesting. I asked them all. Most of them were secular philanthropists. When I mean secular, I'm not trying to stereotype them as well, but they would identify themselves as not really necessarily affiliated with any particular denomination. They love Jews and Jewish causes, Israel, and like Birthright is one of the pet projects, of course, of many, which I'll talk about in a moment. And they would identify themselves as not necessarily, secular in the sense where many of them didn't necessarily even get a real Hebrew education, but they're committed. And I really don't believe in stereotyping, so I don't mean this as categorizing them, but it's relevant to what I'm going to say. And I asked them, I said, if you guys were investing, let's say, in medical research, you would have on board medical consultants, right? People who are experts in medicine and who know what medicine is like. So before you put your money anywhere, you want to know what the respected and authorities in the medical world, or for that matter, any other experts in any other field that you're investing in, say. So I asked them, tell me, who are your experts in Judaism that you consult? And it was a rhetorical question. I said, let's talk, what does an expert on Judaism mean? It means a scholar in Jewish thought. Now, I wasn't waiting for an answer. I was trying to make a point. The point I was making was that there's a big cutoff between a lot of the money given for Jewish causes and scholarship. Most of Jewish scholarship, whether we like it or not, is in the domain of the yeshiva world. That really does not associate much with the secular world, except to raise money from them. But there's an isolated world. These are people living in Israel or the United States, really behind closed walls. The yeshiva world. People who are studying all day Torah and are masters of Torah scholarship. And if you spoke to many of them, they do have a condescending attitude to the outside world. They see them as as not knowledgeable, not as pious, whatever it may be. This doesn't mean everybody in that world is condescending, but there's a certain us and them. And vice versa. People outside of those scholarship walls, in other words, the universities of Judaism, people outside of them are primarily people who did not study in these universities. And it's very interesting. I don't know if it's in any other system do we have such a dichotomy where you have the wealthiest, the most money charity given by Jews are coming from people who did not go necessarily to yeshivas and don't know necessarily much about Torah. But they do love Jews, they do love Israel, they do love Jewish survival, and maybe it's because of the crisis, whatever it may be. Now, of course, this is a major dilemma when it comes to the next generation of philanthropy, because what about the next generation? Israel now is a country. It's no longer struggling from extinction. It's no longer post-Holocaust generation. Today we're a powerful country, powerful nation. So many people are wondering, UJA wonders, how are we going to inspire the next generation to give? What's the crisis? So we have to constantly fabricate new crises? I say this because I gave another talk once to young philanthropists, and I'm telling you why I'm saying all of this in a moment. And I said, today it's no longer just to be an anti-Semite. You can't say my cause is to fight racism. What do you stand for? Not just what you stand against. And at the end of the day, that's ultimately a complicated one. This is what I asked this group of philanthropists. I said, what do you stand for? What do you believe is a Jewish future? And how could you answer that without some level of scholarship or consulting people with scholars? So here we have, the scholars are here, the givers are here. And they all acknowledge that I'm absolutely right. And one of them actually said something very bold, which is exactly what I was thinking, but I'm glad he said it, not me. He said, we're terrified of these scholars. Because they're very religious, and that's not necessarily the direction where we want to be giving. And it was interesting to me because I saw Michael Steinhardt, one of the great funders and originators of Birthright. Birthright is sent to several 100,000 kids from the United States, I don't know how many numbers. It's a great idea. That one way is to ignite Jewish identity is send boys and girls who've never been to Israel. So you have this Birthright Movement. Michael Steinhardt started it, Bronfman, what's his name from Las Vegas, Sheldon Adelson, and they all love this concept because it's a great idea. But it's an interesting thing. Steinhardt wrote an article a few years ago that he thinks this project is a failure. The one they all thought was a success, he considered to be a failure. You know what he wrote? He wrote because there's no follow-up. They come back, and no one ever forgets a trip to Israel, but there was no follow-up. So I met him once at a wedding, and I asked him. I said, "Do you know why there's no follow-up?" He says, "Well, what do you think?" I said, "Because what follow-up are you going to have? You see, going to Israel is a cultural experience. Follow-up has a religious connotation. What are you going to do? Send them to a shul? Send them to yeshiva? And it comes right away, which yeshiva? Which book do you give them?" So this creates this type of, everyone gets paralyzed. He says, absolutely right. We can't agree what that follow-up would be like. Why am I saying all of this? Because this is an example of the split that exists. And I submit that I'm sure, even though not everyone spells it out, it's because the religious world is not trusted. Many people see religious people as being those that are grabbing money for their religious parties in Israel. They don't see them as examples necessarily of what it means to be a godly person. Because if they did, people would gravitate there, and they're seen in a very untrustworthy way. On the other hand, you find many secular Jews, very secular, who give a lot of money to big yeshivas. Some say it's out of guilt because they think, okay, at least you'll continue the tradition. Now, I digress somewhat into this philanthropy thing, not because I wanted to discuss that per se. I just wanted to show an example how this issue is actually affecting life today in many ways, and a lot of things that are unspoken. Many things I just said here are not going to be spoken about so often because it's very controversial. No one's going to make these statements out loud. But we have this problem. Sadly and tragically, I once heard this from Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Sachs, the chief rabbi of Great Britain. Sadly, the Hitler, Yamach Shemel, and the Nazis were able to unite us as Jews in hate more than we can unite ourselves with love, which is a very sad commentary. Because they didn't care what kind of Jew you were. Half Jew, quarter Jew, whatever their way they calculated. They would run around with stethoscopes, listening to people hiding behind the walls. That's how crazy and obsessed they were to find a Jew. And everybody was equal. There'd be every one of us, God forbid, there'd be no discrimination. And it's sad how we, living in freedom, with the capacity to love each other, cannot find that type of common denominator. And that to me is like a life mission, that each of us has to do something about that. Because here, no one is a bystander. You're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. So you can say, what can I do? I'm not a rabbi, I'm not a leader. What do you mean? You're an individual. How do you treat those around you? You have your own community. Whatever community that may be, your sphere of influence. So this is why I wanted to talk about this topic, because I think it's critical. And it's something we all can do something about. It's not something, and you don't necessarily have to start from the top. It can be a grassroots revolution. If we're aware, knowledge is power. Half the cure of an illness is awareness. That's what it says. Yedir tamachla chetzi refuah. It's an expression in Judaism. Awareness, knowledge, and understanding what is the underlying problem, what is the epidemic, so to speak, of divisiveness, is something all of us can learn about. And once you know, you begin to cure the situation. Ignorance is, of course, the worst of all. Now, just to drive the point home, it says that the second temple was destroyed because of divisiveness, because of sinat chinam, which is basically indiscriminate or baseless hatred. Not just hatred, baseless. Second temple, we're talking about 2,000 years ago almost. And Jews then were very devout people. And you're talking about a holy temple where they brought offerings. It was a holy of holies, and still. And the Talmud goes further and says this, that any generation that does not rebuild the temple is as if it destroyed it. Which tells us, you could say, why are you blaming us? 1900 years later, we didn't destroy the temple. Blame them. But it says if we don't rebuild it, it's as if we destroyed it, because we have the power to create baseless love. Just like there's baseless hatred, we have that power. So none of us, maybe you never heard this before, but now that you did, this makes us responsible. Now, if you want to not maybe more responsible than you are, you may want to leave now, because I have more to say on this topic. So, in addressing this, and especially in this week's chapters, we read 2 chapters this week, Achrei and Kadisha. It's a combination. Certain weeks we read a double chapter. Both chapters, but primarily Kadishim, this is a central theme in this chapter. Now, first of all, in this chapter you have the greatest mitzvah of them all. Anyone know what it is? Try to guess. It's called V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, to love your fellow like yourself. It's the greatest mitzvah. It's not my words. Rabbi Akiva in the Medrash, and Rashi cites it. 19:18, I believe, is the verse where he cites and says that V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, loving your fellow, zeh klal godol b'Torah. This is a fundamental principle in the Torah. Klal godol, not just a principle, but a fundamental one. Klal godol. Hillel, classic story. Everyone knows the story where Hillel, the potential convert, comes to Hillel and says, "Teach me the entire Torah standing on one foot." When he came to Hillel's colleague Shammai threw him out. How could you study the Torah standing on one foot? Which means quickly. There's no quick fix. Hillel, on the other hand, said to him the classic, what we call the golden rule: which you find hateful, do not do unto your friend. This is the entire Torah. Now go learn. That's what he told him. Now obviously Hillel also understood you can't touch Torah standing on one foot, yet he still had something to say, tell him that the foundation of it all, whole Torah, is not to do unto others that you don't want to do unto yourself, which is essentially the negative of loving another. And there are reasons the commentaries explain, why didn't he just say V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, like it says in the verse? Why did he use don't do unto others? However one explains it, but it's clearly the same principle. So they call it either klal godol b'Torah or kol ha-Torah kula. That's a very strong statement. It's the entire Torah. So let me submit this question here. It's a hypothetical question, because I don't think it's actually possible. If you meet one person, one Jew, who keeps every to the T 612 mitzvahs, which may not be possible today because of the temple, but that's just hypothetical. To the T, but except one little mitzvah. This V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, loving another. And another person who keeps only one mitzvah, if it's possible, loving another, but the other 612 he doesn't do. Who would you call the more religious Jew? Who's the person of greater faith? Now, of course, this throws us all into a loop, because then, of course, the follow-up question is, who decided what defines faith? Why do we define faith and religion by look and dress, and not by care and empathy? Who made that rule? So this is not some new age, lovey-dovey, 21st century concept that you love another is the basis of the Torah. It's Rabbi Akiva. He's the greatest sage of all. It says, Kula liba de Rabbi Akiva. The Talmud, the whole Talmud goes according to Rabbi Akiva. Hillel from the Talmud. They're the ones that made these statements. So then exactly how did religion become defined by ritual and by rituals? Most people would say, more religious. You keep Shabbat, kosher, mikveh. Those are like the three pillars. And I'm not taking away from the importance of those mitzvahs, don't get me wrong. But how do we define? Maybe a better question is, who says we should be defined altogether? Who are we? Who put us into the judge's seat to determine who's who anyway? Maybe we shouldn't be judging anybody. And if you're already going to discuss, if you're measuring mitzvahs, obviously there is nothing greater than Ahavas Yisrael. There was once a fellow came to see me. There was a guy with long pious, the whole look. He came from Jerusalem, and he wanted me to introduce him to somebody because he was raising money for a mikveh. Anyway, and he introduced himself to me, his name, and then he said, I'm a kanoi. You know what a kanoi is? In Hebrew, a kanoi is a zealot. An extremist, a zealot. He called himself a kanoi. So, I smiled to myself, and I said, okay. I said to him, listen, no problem, I'll introduce you anyone you want to, but on one condition. But answer me this question, what are you a zealot in? What mitzvahs are you extreme in? She says, what do you mean I'm a zealot? I'm a Haredi. He showed me his whole look and all that. I said, so here's the story. You want my help? If you can show me kanos, zealotry, in only one mitzvah called loving others unconditionally, I'll take you to as many people I can introduce you to. But if your zealotry is in all other mitzvahs except that one, go somewhere else, basically. He was he didn't even know what to say. Didn't even know where to begin. He never heard anything like that. He thought something's the matter with me. And I stayed here for the record that, as I said, these are not my ideas. And I'm not, God forbid, dismissing the rest of the Torah. So what does Hillel exactly mean in his statement? And just to throw in, since we're already into throwing questions out there, let's just make the plot thicken. Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students, which you may know, which is the main reason we don't celebrate and we don't do weddings and other unnecessary celebrations during the counting of the Omer. Why is the counting of the Omer not a time for weddings? Because 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, they did not show, they were disrespectful to one another. They didn't show respect to one another. So there was an epidemic and 24,000 of them died. And we honor that in this period. Right now, where we are right now, these days, between Passover and Shavuos. So how does this work exactly? Rabbi Akiva said, klal, godol, Torah is the fundamental principle of Torah, and his own students couldn't get the message. And since, as I said, questions, let's talk about Hillel's statement for a moment. And then I'll answer it all hopefully one analysis of this chapter. Hillel said, the whole Torah is what not to do unto others that which is hateful to you. The whole Torah. He doesn't say part. Now, if you know about Torah, you know that Torah breaks into two types of mitzvahs. There's between man and God, and between man and man. Ben adam l'chavere, ben adam l'mokem. A big part of the Torah, maybe more than half, are serving between you and God. How could Hillel say that under the umbrella of not to do unto others that which you don't like to do done to you, goes, let's say, the laws of offerings, prayer, kosher, Shabbat, purity and impurity. I mean, the list goes on. What does that have to do with behavior between each other? Yes, the mitzvahs like charity, welcoming guests, all the other benevolent and moral mitzvahs you could say between, okay, it goes under the umbrella of don't do unto others that which you don't do. But there's a whole part of the Torah that doesn't fit that. And then the other way around. If that's the entire Torah, why are there so many people who keep the Torah and not necessarily more loving? And vice versa, people who are very loving and not that particularly pious. So a very nice, warm, heartwarming statement from Hillel ends up being, if you think about it, fraught with all kinds of questions. What's going on here? And the relevance, I don't have to again repeat how it's relevant today. If we all had the answers to these questions, I believe we'd have Mashiach here. Because we would have the solution to what caused the temple to be destroyed. And again, we're all part of the solution, all part of the problem. So the answer, my friends, is all in this week's chapter. And when you read the verse, V'ahavta recha kamocha, and some other verses in this chapter, it becomes very clear. So let's start with the opening of the second chapter, Kadisha. So it opens up like this. God says to Moses, speak to the nation of Israel, the children of Israel, and tell them, Kadeshim tiyu, sanctify yourselves. You shall be holy. I'm just looking at the translation here. Kadeshim tiyu literally means you shall be holy, or sanctify yourselves. Ki kadeshani Hashem Elokeichem. Because I, your God, are holy. Am holy. And then goes on a whole series of laws. One of them will be V'ahavta recha kamocha, also not to hate another, and different statements that are around that same theme. So the Ramban, Nachmanides, asks a very basic question. Why do we need a special commandment that you shall sanctify, you shall be holy? The Torah is filled with commandments that you should be holy. You read the chapters before. Eat kosher, so you should be holy. Keep Shabbos, so you should be holy. I mean, there's a series. Why suddenly a particular commandment you should be holy? Isn't the entire Torah about sanctifying our lives? Which means elevating it from crass materialism to something more sublime, something directed, something transcendent. So what is the meaning of this? And the Ramban answers something. 1,000 years ago, he wrote this. He wrote there's a concept called a novel b'reshus ha-Torah. It means a despicable person, so-called with the permission of the Torah, under the guise of the Torah. A religious, obnoxious person. The Torah is coming to tell us, besides all the places in the Torah where it talks about being sanctified, which is, as I said, a central theme, right before they stood on Mount Torah, it says, "V'atam tili mamleches kayanim v'goy kodesh." You shall be for me a nation of priests, a kingdom of priests, and goy kodesh, a holy nation. The word goy kodesh, everywhere you have the word kodesh, Kadisha. So why is this verse giving us a special commandment? It's coming to tell us a particular issue, particular trap. Do not be obnoxious using the Torah as your excuse. In other words, not only in the 20th century, 21st century, back in the time of the Ramban, there was such a concept where a person is capable of using the Torah for obnoxious and for despicable ends. Why is that such a terrible thing? As I said earlier, because that's desecrating God. You want to be despicable, obnoxious because you're selfish, or because everything is driven by self-interest in this world, or survival of the fittest, and we live in a world where dog eats dog and whoever is more powerful wins? Fine. You're not schlepping God into it. But as soon as you start talking about Torah and God, and then you behave in a way like that, that is considered to be a major defilement, a major desecration. And that's what the Nachmanides says. Now, how is it possible that a person could be that way? So there's a statement in the Talmud. I've mentioned it in the past. Maybe you've heard it. Does anyone know Aramaic here? It goes like this. Gamva apumachtarte rachmone karye. In the Talmud, the Tractate of Brachos, the Talmud says, here's a scenario, a ganef, a thief. Before he goes out to steal, he prays to God to help him succeed. Now tell me, what kind of thief is that? What kind of person would do that? God says, "Lo signev" in the 10 Commandments, don't steal. And he's going to the God that told him not to steal and said, "Listen, I need your help. I'm praying to you to help me succeed in what you told me not to do." It's one thing, you want to deny God, you want to think God is not watching, but how is that possible? So Hasidic thought explains, because Amunah, faith, is what we call, on its own, called Macif. Macif is a Kabbalistic, mystical, or spiritual term, refers to something that's hovering around you, but it's not internalized. Well, a person can have faith and still behave in direct contradiction to their own faith. And if you think this has to require insanity, well, maybe it is insanity, but every one of us does it. Does anybody live up to the standards and ideals that you always believe in? There are many things we do all the time. You know, even while you're doing it, you know that it's not even... How often does you have a conflict between your mind and your heart? and you know that's not the right thing, and you still give in. And then you have consequences, and you do the mistake again. So the Talmud does say that a sin, when a person a person does not sin unless it's a moment of insanity. But this insanity is not a plea that you can use for defense, by the way. What does insanity mean? It means concealment. No healthy person would put their hand in fire. If we knew the damage we did through certain behavior, and we saw it like a hand in fire, no person would ever do that. Why is it that you do it anyway? Because you don't feel the consequences. It's invisible. The Talmud asks the question even about people. How is it possible, the mystics ask, that human beings who are all limbs of one big organism, God created us all, we're all parts of one larger reality, how is it possible we can hurt each other? And the Talmud uses an example, Yerushalmi. The Talmud says, just like one hand will not hurt another, just like the one hand won't hurt another, one human being shouldn't be able to hurt another. The reason is, is it conceivable that in a healthy body, the left hand does something wrong, the right hand is going to damage it, is going to hurt it? When's the last time you slapped yourself? I mean, we sometimes do that for whatever, frustration, but hopefully not in destructive ways. So the only reason they explain is because it's concealed. We don't feel that we're part of one organism. That's why it's a moment of insanity. So essentially, this idea of faith, you can have faith, and then have that distortion. While you're having faith, you pray to God to do something that God is telling you not to do. Because the faith is not internalized, it's not integrated. It can be like immature faith. Inconsistency. Is the inconsistency that every person, even the greatest people of faith, succumb to, because you can have faith, it doesn't mean it always affects your behavior, and God is not standing right in front of you in the most physical way. Rabbi Akiva ben Zakkai, a great sage, on his deathbed, said to his students, Halavai. He gave them his final words were, Halavai, may it be that you should have fear of God as much as you fear human beings. He's telling this to some of the greatest students, so you can imagine about us. Because the fact is, when a person is watching, you have somebody that you're ashamed of, there's pride and so on, it affects you. God, you can have deep faith in God and still somewhat detachment. So going back to this statement, therefore, so it's very possible for a person to have Torah, but compartmentalize, and not realize that they're not living up to Torah. You could eat kosher and not be kosher. Because we live in a world that is duplicitous, a world where God Himself concealed His presence, and therefore allowed for the potential of us saying one thing and doing another. How often have we judged someone else of something that's far less than we ourselves were guilty of? Because we see all the flaws except our own. And you'll always see it more in someone else than you'll see it in yourself. So we have this so-called dichotomy. We have this duality, compartmentalization, which of course is antithetical to the whole concept of Hashem Echad. God is one. I always use the classic example, Bertrand Russell versus Maimonides. Lahavdil. So Bertrand Russell was once asked how could he behave unethical when he's teaching ethics at Cambridge. And his response was, I also teach mathematics and I'm not a triangle. Especially in the academic world, it prides itself. You don't have to be what you teach. I could be a master, an expert in something. It doesn't mean I have to live up to it. Maimonides, by contrast, writes in laws of Hilchos Deis, the laws of, Deis, of human morality, Hilchos Deis. He writes like this, that you want to recognize a true wise person, you know what you have to look at? Not at his oratory skills, or brilliance, or scholarship. You look at the details, how he walks and talks, eats and sleeps, deals with people. That's where you see the true Chacham. Which means there is no compartmentalization. Now this doesn't mean everyone always lives up to that, but to make it a standard and to glorify it like Russell did, no, Judaism does not see that as a virtue. You have to live, you are what you teach and you teach what you are. Now, we don't always live up to it, but the expectation is what we say in the most famous prayer of all, Hashem Echad, unity, seamlessness. Children are a perfect example. What you see is what you get. Later in life, we learn to be duplicitous. You wanted to ask something?
So, for those people who are very observant and follow all but one of the commandments and don't treat people the way they want to be treated, but they know that God is watching them, is it that they don't know the difference between right and wrong? Is it that they don't have self-awareness of what they're doing, or is it that they forget who the audience is and they think the audience is everybody around them and not God?
I'm going to answer this. I'm getting to that. I'm just building a case toward it. You have a little more patience? Okay. Yeah. I'd rather, they say there's two ways to deal with an issue. You can go short and long road or the long and short road. The short and long road sounds short, but it ends up being very long, because you end up having many more questions. The long short road is initially longer, but then you have you get to the root of the issue and you solve all the symptoms. That's what I'm trying to do, more relatively speaking, in one class. But I'm going to get to that. And I also don't want to come across, I'm not judging anybody, including people in that, we're all in one boat here. We all have to look at ourselves. But I'm addressing this issue. So I'll get to that in a few minutes. If I don't fully answer it, you'll ask me again, okay? So we live in a world where there is duplicity, and the mystics explain it's exactly the way God created it that way. They call the Arizal, the great Arizal, the holy Arizal writes about the great symptom, which is the great concealment, the black hole. That in order for us to be an independent reality, the divine presence had to some way conceal his presence. That way we could emerge. If we were submerged in the divine light, infinite light, we could not rise. It would be like in the presence of an overwhelmingly brilliant, infinitely brilliant teacher, and we would not be able to, we'd be completely overwhelmed and impossible for us to not be annihilated. So the Arizal explains that there was a black hole, a quantum leap, that allowed existence to emerge. As a result, however, there are plenty of dichotomies and all forms of distortions, because it's a world that's disconnected from its source, at least in its perception. So we have the classic dichotomy between who you are and what you do. When most people, you ask them who are you, they give you their business card. But that's what you do, it's not who you are. The split between soul and body, between higher purpose and self-interest. The list goes on. But it also applies itself in the religious realm, and that is the dichotomies that exist, where a person can be growing up very traditional, but it may be all cultural. For all you know, they may not even have God in their lives. Because what is God at the end of the day? If a person grew up in a devout, pious home, and it was taught from day one, this is what you do. This is where you wash your hands. These are the prayers you say. Here's Shabbos. Here's Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Hanukkah, Purim, the fast days, Pesach, Shavuos, etc., etc. That's their life. There's a lot of powerful cultural peer pressure involved, and you go to those the schools that advance this. So then when you get a little older, you have to ask yourself the question, am I a devout Jew because I grew up around it and it was basically, that was my culture? And if I had grown up in a different culture, I would have had different rituals. Or is it something that you've actually come to experience God in your life? That itself is a big question. And what about those of us that didn't grow up in a traditional home? You grow up, let's say, in a home, your parents were radical atheists or communists, which is not unheard of. And they had a whole different system. They taught you that religion is the worst thing in the world. Are you really not religious, or you just simply programmed that way because that's what you heard from the people you respected, the people you loved, the people who brainwashed you? So at the end of the day, in general, it's a good question. Who are we? How much are we a product of our environments, our parents, our schools, and how much have we really chosen for ourselves? And then throw into the pack the media pressure and all the different pressures in the marketplace and everything, that you start wondering, what decisions do we really make that are truly independent choices? Now, I know we love independence, and we're free. But we're free of what? We may be free of monarchs telling us what to do and authorities, but are you free of the culture that has shaped you? So the first mitzvah told to Abraham was, Lech lecha ma'artzecha, leave your homeland, your place of your birth, the home of your parents, to find yourself. Because it's not so simple to find yourself. I mentioned many times the Baal Shem Tov's powerful interpretation. In the Shemon Esrei, in the Amidah, we say in the beginning, Elokeinu, our God, Elokei Avosenu, the God of our parents, and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Elokei Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. And he has the question, chronologically, is the other way around. First it's God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then the God of our parents, then our God. So why do you begin with our God? And his answer is, because worshiping God is not about worshiping the God of your parents and your grandparents. It's about owning it, finding your God. So chronologically, education-wise, we begin by our parents teaching us the traditions. But then you have to own it. And you have to integrate it. So is it inconceivable if a person who's been cultured by all of this, grown up in culture, and religion for them is their culture, is it inconceivable that they'll be inconsistent? Of course. Because it's not necessarily they own God. They don't feel accountable to God. They feel pressured, whether they know it or not, and may even be lovingly, by a culture that has certain demands on them. Now, even if they did find their own God, it's still, as I said, we're not perfect human beings. So one great distortion that exists is religious obnoxiousness. It's as a contradiction of terms as possible. Because let's not use the word religion, let's use the word God. If someone is a godly person, is God obnoxious? No. Right? No one would say that. Well, some people would. Atheists would, but not a believer. God is not obnoxious. God says, emulate my ways. Just as I'm compassionate, you be compassionate. Just as I'm giving, you be giving. So how could anybody behave in an obnoxious way? It's exactly like the thief that asked God to help him steal when God told him not to steal. It's a classic dichotomy, but so what? We've seen many inconsistencies. Obviously, it's much more glaring and much more disturbing when it's in a religious nature. I've asked some Muslims that I know, personally know, how can you explain to me how people who, if you don't believe in God, Hitler, God forbid, as again, his name should be erased, not a believer. You believe in man dominates. Whether it was Nietzschean philosophy or whatever it was, And yes, the survival of the fittest, and the Aryan race was the purest race, and his distorted mind, they have to dominate. So for a person who doesn't believe in a God, or a person who believes that man can be Superman, the Ubermensch, that's what it was called, the superhuman, it's one thing. But for a person to believe in God, and God said, I created everybody in my divine image, how is it possible that you as a believer, I've asked this to certain individuals, can call for the death of another human being? So of course the answer is because God told me to do that. So besides the fact, how do you know God told you to do that? Where exactly did He tell you to go to this person and kill them? Let's talk about Abraham, who's the father of all nations. What did Abraham do when he faced with infidels? There's the word used, infidels, the decadent West. So Abraham, first God wanted to conceal the fact, considered concealing the fact from Abraham, because He didn't want Abraham to challenge him. That's what the Torah says. But then God said, how could I conceal this from the person who loves me so much? So He tells Abraham about his plan to destroy the wicked city of Sodom and Gomorrah. And what does Abraham do? Exactly as God feared. He challenges God. He says, how could you destroy an entire city? Maybe there's some innocent people there. And then goes the whole process. 50, 40, maybe 10. And he accuses God and saying, how could the world will say that the judge of the world universe is not doing justice? At the end, they don't find anyone there except Lot that He saves. And God does destroy. But documented is how man of God challenged God for destroying a wicked city that everyone agreed was wicked. So why don't all the religious fanatics through the centuries get that message? And I say the same to my Christian friends. For almost 1800 years, they terrorized the world in the name of Christianity. The sword, the crusades, to dominate, to impose God on the non-believers, especially if they were Jews. Where does this come from? Where in the Torah do you find this example? Not Abraham was not that way. Moses was not that way. Anyone that even was a zealot in any way is always usually criticized. It's a distortion. God becomes created in the human image instead of the human created in the divine image. What's the greatest sin of all? Idolatry. Creating a false God. Why? Why does God care? God is pretty secure. I would say very secure. Why does he care if some human beings want to be foolish and convince themselves that they're going to pray to a piece of wood, or to a sun or a moon, or to a tree? Why would God care? Is he jealous? The answer is because once you create a God in your image, there's no hope. The idea of idol worship was, I can't deal with an invisible God, so I need some symbolic symbol, a star, a heaven, a sun, a moon, other objects. I need some symbol to identify with. What are you really saying? I can't deal with God on his terms, I need a God on my terms. You know what the root of that is? The root of all problems. The whole idea of a God is that it's not about me. It's not about you. There's something higher than you. And you have to answer to that higher force. Once you make God on your terms, then all hope is lost, because now everything is on my terms. It's ultimately, idolatry is an extension of self-worship, basically. So that ultimately, religion can be avodah zarah, can be idolatry. You start worshiping your rituals, and you forget there's a God, or it's a God on your terms and your comfort zone. And anyone is capable. There's a thing called religious addiction. What is religious addiction? Just like drug addiction, just like alcohol addiction. What's addiction? That the master is the object and the human being is the slave. So once religion becomes an addiction, which is your crutch, the thing you hide behind, it's no longer necessarily a godly thing. It may have godly elements, and it may still be better to do mitzvah completely for ulterior motives or cultural reasons than not at all. But to confuse it with submitting to a higher authority, the first step in all Judaism is, that's why V'ahavta L'recha Kamocha is the foundation of the entire Torah. It means it's not about me, it's about loving another human being. It's the hardest thing to do, because we're all driven by self-interest. You wake up in the morning, you feel yourself, you feel no one else. God has no value if you're not ready to transcend your own self. What's the value of a God if there's no transcending yourself? So the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, chapter 32, Lev, in Hebrew Lev, heart, is 32, means a heart. It also pronounced love, Lev. So he says something powerful. And this goes back now to Hillel, the questions asked about Hillel. How could Hillel say it's the entire Torah? Loving another, or not doing to others. When I said there's a whole part of Torah, Shabbos, kosher, that are not necessarily love, he answers that's not correct. We have to have a new definition of Torah, a new definition of love. What is love? He puts it in one short sentence, extremely powerful, what real love is. Love is transcendence of spirit over matter. Two human beings, right here, we're sitting in different chairs right now. For you to give me your chair, you have to get up from your seat. Because physicality, by its very nature, inherently, is defined by time and space. Two things cannot occupy the same space. So how can one person love another? If I give you part of my food, I have less. If I give you part of my money, I have less. Everything in the material world gets diminished if you share. But love is not materialistic. Love is spirit. So two people can be sitting in two separate chairs, but they transcend their physical differences. And you could be 1,000,000 miles away from someone and love them just like you're sitting near them. And you could sit near someone and hate him just like he's 1,000,000 miles away. So love is a spiritual component. Two corpses cannot love each other. Sorry for sounding so morbid. It's two souls that love each other. So he says love is not possible when you make the body primary and the soul secondary. It's only possible when you make nefesh ikar, the soul primary, and the body secondary. That's true love. Now you'll say, one second, there are a lot of loves that are very selfish. Well, those loves are bodily loves. And you know what happens there? It's a love that's all about me. It's like the guy that goes on a date and talks about himself for 2 hours, and then he tells the girl, okay, enough about me. Now what do you think about me? So that type of love exists, yes. That type of love is, it's me, me, me. And I love you, like a guy told me. Do you know how to love unconditionally? Yeah. If she loved me, I would love her unconditionally, If she did what I wanted her to do, I'd be unconditional. Love can also be trapped in the same problem of the ego. The whole concept of a God is that it's not just about you. There's more to it than you. And this is what the Alter Rebbe continues in Tanya. He says, and that's the entire Torah. Why do we keep Shabbos? Why do we eat kosher? Why do we bring the offerings? Why do we pray? It's all about transcendence. What's Shabbat? 6 days of the week you're immersed in your own work and your own toil and the fruit of your labor. One day you dedicate to transcendence, to not be so immersed in your material activities. Same thing with prayer. Same thing with offerings. The entire Torah, it teaches you transcendence of being more sublime and less crass, being more spiritual and less materialistic, more selfless and less egoistic and narcissistic. Every mitzvah. That's why Hillel says loving another is the same as the entire Torah, because it all comes from the same root, transcendence. So when you learn to transcend by loving another or not doing to another that you don't want done to yourself, that is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. And now go learn. Now go learn that when you do Shabbos, it's not just about keeping Shabbos because I want to keep Shabbos because it's cultural, I'm used to it. No, you're keeping Shabbos as a way of you becoming more godly. And that's a direct result of what loving another person, because that's also about being more godly. It always disturbed me, I remember, seeing the images we've seen, people throwing stones at cars that drive in Israel on Shabbos. So I used to always think, what disturbed me was, what's kind of throwing stones? What kind of behavior is that? Go over to the person, speak to them. You want to invite them to your house, to shul? Gesundheit, fine. Then somebody told me something which shocked me even more. I didn't even imagine that. They said, no, they're not throwing stones because they want to tell them why you're driving on Shabbos. They're throwing stones because why you're driving on my street on Shabbos. They don't care about you driving, it's about me. So I thought that was, okay, that's already, It's one thing, it's a distortion, you don't know how to be kind. So you're throwing stones to remind them, you're desecrating Shabbos. They're not even thinking about those people driving. If they're considering those people driving Shabbos as Goyim, as non-Jews. This is a perfect example of a grotesque distortion. The whole point of Shabbos is to be more godly. That's what Hillel said. He didn't say, keep Shabbos and then you'll be more loving. He says, when you're more loving, that's the foundation of the entire Torah. If you can keep Shabbos and not be Shabbosdik. If you're Shabbosdik, you will be a more loving person. Tell me the next time you see someone come out of a shul, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Shabbos, davening, praying, studying, and they're more refined, they're more sensitive, they're more kind to other people, then you know you've got someone that has found God. Someone that doesn't have any such impact, I'm not saying they don't have at all a godly experience. They're doing it maybe for the right reasons, but there's a major lack of integration. There's a major dichotomy going on, and definitely not giving it much thought. So I'm not interested in criticizing individuals for the same reason that the whole point is to be loving and kind, but you have to call a spade. And there are times where it has to be spelled out what is the foundation of Judaism. Now we live in a world which is very complicated. 90% of Jews today are what we call assimilated, whatever the word means. At the same time, they're divine souls like anyone else, created in the divine image, and who knows who's the greater soul? We have no idea. So you have many mitzvahs, many Jews keeping many, many mitzvahs, and many also keep Ahavas Yisrael in the most beautiful way. I mean, you go to hospitals, you see Bikkur Cholims, the people who've set up to help the sick. So I'm not suggesting there's only complete self-containment. There's a lot of beauty and a lot of charity and so on. Obviously, I'm talking about what's lacking. So where do we begin? You have a situation where the so-called Orthodox, or the more observant traditional, are a minority. Many of them are distrusted by the others. So my suggestion is that we have to stop looking at each other and start looking at ourselves. All of us, whoever we are. There's one God that created us all. We all are created in the divine image. And the question is, are you living up to that potential? Love is the first litmus test. To care for another. This doesn't mean, by the way, that you forgive another. Like, you can love your child. It doesn't mean, if you're healthy, that your child, anything they do is good. In disciplining your child, there's the example. A child comes home from school, really did something terrible. Everyone agrees, really bad. So you as a parent, what do you do? So you have two types of parents usually. One, my child can never do wrong. It's always someone else's fault. the principal, the teacher, the other friends, the families, the street, whatever. Then you have the other type of parent who's right away disciplinary. Oh, you did something wrong, you're grounded, punishment, demoralization, and the works. There's a third option. The Torah option is like this. The third Torah option is you sit your child down in some way, and this is the hardest option because it requires effort. It requires thinking. The first two are easy. You just ignore it or you just punish. The third one says, how do I convey to my child that I love my child, and because I love my child, I expect more? So I don't want the child to think this was right to do, but I don't want to demoralize and break the child either. So you have a story with one of the Rebbes. When he was a little child, he did something. Must have not been such the biggest thing. But his father, the only time in his life, he says, his father touched him was then. And what means a touch? His father just touched his cheek. It wasn't even a slap, a touch. But for his father to touch, that was already a big thing. But he said the big discipline, the great discipline was not when he touched me. He said, when later I saw him standing in a corner crying, my father. And that I never forgot. In other words, he cried that he had to touch me. So how do you convey to someone that you love them even if you disagree with them? Or even if you feel they did something wrong? And because you love them, that's why you care. That takes work. That takes a lot of work. Because it's very easy to discipline and just be a punishing person. It's very easy to demoralize another. How do you motivate someone? How do you be a coach that tells someone, listen, you can be good, but you can be excellent. I got to kick you in the pants for that. And I'm doing it with love. So one of the Chassidim, Rabbi Schoenberg Gordon, who's a rabbi of Shalom in Maplewood, New Jersey, he told the story. Years ago, he asked the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, how do you deal with a constituent that is not behaving properly? Do you rebuke them? Do you reprimand them? Anger? What do you do? Do you ignore it? So he said, since you traveled through Turkey, because he ran out of Russia, he went through Turkey, he says everything is divine providence. In Turkey, they have a thing called a Turkish bath, otherwise known as a schwitz, right? So the custom is like this: you go to a bath, a Turkish bath, a bath, what do they call it? A sweat, whatever, schwitz. Everyone knows what schwitz is. Okay. So it's a very steamy room, right? I mean, you have the hot ones and the steamy ones, and it opens up all your pores, and the grime comes pouring out or dripping out, whatever. Then you climb higher because heat rises, and it opens up even more pores. And then you come out, and the custom there in some of these places is you pay the attendant some money, and they slap you with these eucalyptus leaves, like a broom made out of leaves. Any one of you did it? Okay. They say it's very exhilarating. It does some type of thing. Some say it's not exhilarating at all, but that's what everybody does, so they do it. Culture, yet again. But, so the Rebbe said to him, this is the lesson. When you see someone that has a little grime inside of them, in their lives, first thing to do is warm them up. Warm them up. Instead of being cold and distant and angry, warm them up. Then elevate them. Make them feel special. Compliment them. Find the things that you find that is beautiful in them. And not in a manipulative way, in a real way. Find the positive things. Cultivate trust. And then they'll pay you to slap them. In other words, the best friend you can have is not the friend that just says whatever you do is great, or the other friend that just criticizes you no matter what you do. The best friend is someone that loves you, you can trust. They're not looking to criticize you, to judge you, but they know how to tell you, you could have done better. You want someone to kick you in the pants that you can love, that loves you. Unfortunately, it's hard to find people who just do it with good intentions. Many people just like to kick others, like to criticize. But that's the best person you can have, because that's the person that will make you from good to excellent. That's the real coach, the real mentor that can change your life. Really change your life. So going back to the theme here, so the answer to Hillel's statement is that that's what Torah is. Torah is transcendence, love is transcendence. Unfortunately then, people can keep Torah, but the Torah can be something that's just cultural. Or even if it has God in it, it's not fulfilling what the Torah's real purpose is. It's become trapped in rituals, become trapped in traditions, and sometimes it's out of insecurity. What do you really think is the reason that people have difficulty coexisting with others? Because they're that religious and they just can't tolerate someone's decadent behavior? Maybe it's because they're insecure. And they like their comfort zone. And they're afraid of being influenced. The most secure people are the people that can go anywhere and not be influenced, because they influence before they're influenced. The best defense is offense. Anyone that's too living too defensive of a life with ghetto walls around them, it's usually out of fear. Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, next week we celebrate Lag BaOmer. Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, another student of Rabbi Akiva who did survive the epidemic because he was a loving man. He had 12 years he had to escape from the Romans who wanted to kill him because he was studying Torah against their decree. Now, what happens after 12 years? You can imagine a man like him comes out, Rabbi Elazar, his son, the author of the Zohar, maybe the greatest mystic of all, the father of all mysticism. So he's a very sublime state after those 12 years, separate from civilization. And he enters the world, imagine our world, and he sees the pettiness, the arguments, the superficiality, the stupidity. So it says in the Talmud, whatever he looked at began to burn. Physically, metaphorically. So God says, you're not ready, my friend. 12 years. He sends him back for a 13th year. Imagine, a man is 12 years in exile. He sends him back, go for a 13th year, bar mitzvah, mature. And now you come out, now he comes out, the 13th year, and wherever Rav Shimon Bar Yochai went, it says whatever he saw that was broken, he repaired. So you would think the more spiritual one is the one that can't tolerate. No, the more spiritual one is the one that can tolerate but repairs. Not tolerate that he ignores. We're not talking about someone who's indifferent. But he takes his passion and he has the maturity, the seasoning to figure out how do I reach them instead of how do I burn them up. This is Judaism. We live in a dark world. We recognize it. This doesn't mean that everything is forgiven and everything is all cool. It's not correct. There are standards. There's right and wrong. There's morality. There's high standards. But you're a godly person. God created such a world. Find a way to reach. Find a way to inspire. Find a way to touch. That means you have to go out of your comfort zone. Because your comfort zone may be you tolerate people like yourself. And therefore you love people like yourself. What about loving someone that's not like yourself? That requires a lot of security, a lot of confidence, and above all, God. So what God really does is the thing that the God ingredient is what introduces into you what's called bittul. It's not about you. Whether it's a person who's about him, whether it's completely consumed with materialism, or consumed with some other selfish interest, or someone who's consumed with selfish religion, it's all the same problem. They're lacking a God that frees you from your own perception of things. And no one is immune from that. Religious people are not religious. Everyone is in the same boat. We all live in a world where God is concealed. And religion can become a trap. So this chapter teaches us what means love is the foundation of it all, and not to be an obnoxious human being. Because it's very easy to fall into that trap. And that's where ritual gets divorced of spiritual. SPI, before ritual changes it. Another dichotomy, I mentioned the dichotomy before with the philanthropists and all that. 90% of Americans, according to statistics, say they have some God, spirituality in their lives. 40 or 50% say they identify with a religion. That's not a small discrepancy. Clearly, religion and spirituality are not seen the same. And if you ask most people, spirituality is a free-spirited thing. Some people identify music with it. Anything that's like transcendent. Religion, ritual. I go to church, synagogue, a mosque. I mean, for Jews, synagogue, or Yom Kippur, Seder. It's about actions. How many people will say religion is about spirituality? It's not seen as the same, one and the same. And that's an absolute distortion from a Torah perspective. Torah teaches that the Zohar says Judaism is a body and a soul. The mechanics of Shabbat is what to do on Shabbos, what you're supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do. And the soul of Shabbos is why you do it, what it achieves, how the worlds elevate, how your spirit elevates. Every mitzvah has a body and a soul. And if you think about it, it makes total sense. There's no such thing as something without a body and a soul. It's called in Kabbalah energy and a container. The words on a page are the containers. The idea they convey is the energy. And they both both have to become a fusion of each, one or the other. Or what we call in physics, energy and matter. Today we know they're reversible. The Kabbalah talks about them as two entities that are really one, and they have to discover that. But they are initially in conflict, tension. There's inherent tension between matter and spirit. Judaism teaches the way to deal with it is not to destroy the matter, annihilate the material, It's also not to destroy the spirit. It's to spiritualize the material. And thus you have energy and container. You have a symbiosis, a synthesis between the two. Human beings, each of us are different. There are no two people that think alike. That's what the Talmud says. And we see it. So how can people of different opinions get along? Why should our diversity not lead to chaos and war? Well, historically they have. Because at the end of the day, what is war? War is one person, one group, disagreeing with another to the point that we're more powerful and we're going to dominate you and we'll destroy you. I know it's illogical. It's illogical. But that's how it is. So there's the other option is diversity leads to harmony. Now God could have created one human being on earth and there'd be no one to fight with. Even though they say those two guys in Afghanistan, those two Jews, now one of them died recently. There's two Jews left in Afghanistan. This is true. And they both thought they were the head of the community, so they didn't speak to each other. Now, mind you, there was no community except those two. But, potential. You never know. Afghanistan may be the next frontier. So God created diverse human beings because he was a great gambler. He took the risk that diversity could lead to divisiveness and war. But diversity could also lead to something that one can never bring. And that's called shalom. When we say shalom, peace. In Hebrew, shalom doesn't just mean peace. Peace is not just the absence of war. Shalom also means completeness, fulfillment, totality. In Kabbalistic or Sphiratic structure, it's Tiferet. It's the middle path. Beauty. What is beauty? One color can be beautiful. Blue, red can each be beautiful. But beauty is always harmony within diversity. When you have a room like right here, each of us is different. And we learn to work with each other, complement each other, we can create something called beauty that one of us can never create. And that's the purpose of existence. And God was ready to take the risk that we may disagree, but He believed that He also gave us souls, that if we're wise, we'll learn from each other and learn to complement each other. And that's the essence of V'ahavta Kamocha. It's the story of all of life. Creating harmony among the diversity. And not with one of us annihilating. It's not like the guy that says, you know what? I will definitely fight for peace as long as everyone agrees with me. That's not peace. We say in the morning prayer, we say the two verses that contradict each other, and then comes a third verse and mediates between the two. True mediation is not two against one. It's finding a deeper common denominator between two people who may not have seen their commonality. That's true love. Marriage is, we all know, a mystery, especially if it lasts. It's a mystery. What is it? How could two human beings, strangers, growing up in different homes, different communities, different mindsets, male and female, let alone, who are in many ways will never understand each other, and the longer you're married, you realize that, and still find a way to really love each other. I know today not necessarily happens. There's too often it doesn't happen that way, but you see loving relationships. What's the secret of their love? The secret is bittul. That's their secret. They're able to transcend themselves for a greater cause, for something beyond both of them. We stand under a chuppah at a wedding ceremony, under a canopy. It's transcendence. It shows there's something that's more than me and more than you, more than the sum of the parts. They share a vision together. So it's not just a marriage of convenience or for the children. There's something, a love that is transcendent. Not a love that's driven by needs, it's a love that's driven by transcendence, which in effect also serves needs, but it doesn't begin and end with human needs. It's another discussion, but I just wanted to point out how love is the central component of entire Judaism, entire Torah, entire God, everything in existence. And every mitzvah is an aspect of love. Even mitzvahs that seem to be between you and God. Yes, so when a person truly eats a kosher meal, afterwards they would be more refined and kinder to another human being. And if you don't see that, there's a major problem. I'm not saying it can always be done, but let's not think that it's normal or that it's expected. There's a higher expectation. So, in the final equation, much can be said about all of this. I think that each of us can do something a lot. Firstly, as I said, awareness. We need to know what the Torah does say and what it doesn't say. I want to share with you a story that I think captures this. I'll try to sum it up. It's a longer story, but I'll tell you the short version of it. I was on a panel, invited on a panel. It's a very powerful story. On a panel discussion with 2 other rabbis. This panel was a definitive moment in my life, and actually was one of the things that developed a lot of my ideas about obnoxiousness and rabbis. And we talked about different matters of Jewish faith. At the end of the panel was in Huntington, New York, in Torah Law School. At the end, the audience was invited to ask questions. A woman gets up in the back, and I'll never forget her question. She says, "You all talk so eloquently." The panel was a conservative rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi, and me, and my son, yours truly. The woman asks, "You all talk so eloquently about Mashiach, Messiah, coming at the end of days. I'd like to know, all of you answer this question. I speak on behalf of the largest segment of Jewish population today, the unaffiliated. What will happen to us if Mashiach comes tonight?" That was her question. Good question, I thought. I thought it was an excellent question. Thank God I was the third one to speak, because that was the order. So the first rabbi, the Orthodox rabbi, said the following 4 words. "God will have mercy," is what he said. And the audience began to boo him. Did you ever hear 500 people boo someone in an auditorium? It's not pleasant. It's very, very, booing is like very, what's it called? It's, has an echo. And he was extremely humiliated, but, clearly the audience did not appreciate his profound response, and actually saw it as a condescending response. Then came the conservative rabbi, and this is what he said. He turned to me and said, "Rabbi Jacobson, I have the same question myself. What will happen to them?" And then he added some fuel to the fire, and he said, his voice was dripping with cynicism, and he said, "I once heard from this tzaddik, from this great man, this so-called righteous man, that said the Holocaust took place because the Jews had sinned, and because of the assimilation born in Central Europe, that's where it originated from." And he went on to literally spell out, tit for tat, how every crime perpetrated by the Nazis was tit for tat for something that Jews had sinned, transgressed. I won't repeat what he said, but the place was like mortified, including myself. So he said, "Is that going to happen if Mashiach comes tonight? That suddenly all those unaffiliated, the irreligious will be annihilated or punished?" So you can imagine the stage was set for a very, what can I say? There was a very tense room, and I knew I couldn't get away with some type of cute answer. And I racked my brains. This was all going on very quickly, and I said to God, put the right words in my mouth. And I thought to myself, what would the Baal Shem Tov, what would Moshe Rabbeinu, Oyev Yisrael, it says he was a lover of Jews, what would the Levi Yitzchak Barditchev, the great people who loved everyone unconditionally, what would they say? And this is what I responded. And this came from my own background in education, particularly in the spiritual teaching, Chassidus. I said, the Baal HaTanya, the Alter Rebbe once said that when you ask a question, you don't have an answer, you tell a story. And if that doesn't work, you sing a song. So I'll tell a story, and if that doesn't work, I'll have to sing. Which got a laugh, but obviously was not enough. And then I proceeded to tell the following story, how one of the Rebbes who once speaking very admirably about all Jews, unconditional, even simple, and he spoke about especially people who have no education and are not particularly pious, have a quality that is very profound, in many ways deeper than scholars and pious Jews. So one of his Chassidim, who was a great scholar himself, came to the Rebbe and said, "Rebbe, how could you speak of them such terms, even greater than the scholars and the pious ones?" And the Rebbe, knowing that this Chassid, this disciple of his, was also a businessman, a diamond merchant, he asked him to bring several diamonds of different values. So he complied. He brought these stones, and the Rebbe said, "I'm going to choose the most expensive one." And he chose the largest stone. And the Rebbe, and he said, "Is this correct?" So he didn't want to contradict the Rebbe, and he said, "It's not." But the Rebbe said, "But is the largest one, is the most lustrous stone? How could you tell me that?" He says, "Rebbe, listen, you need to have a trained eye. The naked eye, you can't see the value of a true diamond." I don't know if he said the 4 C's, the cut, the color, carats, clarity. But So the Rebbe smiled and said to him, if that's the case with mere stones, how much more so with souls? Who are you to tell me you need to have a trained eye before you talk about souls? And then I continued and I said, listen, we don't know God's mysterious ways. Why, for example, are some souls born into homes, beautiful home, healthy home, functional home? They give their children great education, all the opportunities, a Jewish education, a spiritual education. I'm giving you the best possible example. And then there's a soul thrown into a home that's abusive, dysfunctional, broken, terrible education, no Jewish education, no spiritual, nothing. Obviously, it's too extreme, but who chose which soul should go where? Who chose right here in this room why your soul was born into your family? This is God's mysterious ways. So only God knows the deeper reasons. For us to sit in judgment and decide which soul is greater, maybe the greatest soul is the one in the most difficult life situation. How do we know? Like he says in the Tanya, who knows? Who's the greatest soul in this room here right now? Can anybody speculate? Any of you are masters of the soul? You have to be arrogant to even suggest you can speculate. How do you know? And then I concluded and I said that the Alter Rebbe also said one more thing, that when Moses was shown till the end of days, it says, Ad Hayom Achron, he was shown till the end of time what will be. It says he was the humblest man that walked on earth. You know why? Because he saw the last generations, where he saw assimilated Jews who not necessarily had any education, not necessarily pious, and still trying. This one searching, this one putting on film, this one goes Yom Kippur to synagogue, whatever it is that everyone is trying. That humbled him. Because his generation was a Dardea, it was an enlightened generation. They saw miracles, and still were far from perfect. They built the golden calf. And here's a generation, thousands of years later, they don't have all the revelations that existed in the past. That humbled him. So I concluded that I was taught that if Mashiach comes tonight, the souls with the greatest challenges will march first, and the rest will follow. And by tomorrow morning, everyone will know, in a loving way, how Torah and Mitzvot are the best way to actualize as a human being and as a Jew. Though this may sound like tooting my horn, there was an unbelievable emotional reaction in the auditorium when I finished. First of all, the other two rabbis didn't even begin to try to answer the question, which itself is very telling. Secondly, I really felt that there were real consequences on the line, because there was a room of 500 people. And if they go away without an answer to such a question, especially that woman, what does that say about us as rabbis? I don't have an answer to such a question. And I ask you, don't reveal the cards, but test this question with people you know and rabbis. Let's hear what they answer. Don't tell them the answer. Tell them what you ask them this question. It will reveal a lot about the understanding or lack of understanding of what souls are about. What's fundamentally missing in our generation is not we're good people, a lot of good intentions. Oh boy, I think there's spook. I'm really saying things that are if the lights start going out here. What's lacking fundamentally is not our intentions are good. There are many, many good people. I think all people are good. What's lacking is we live in a generation where our technological progress far, far, far outshines our spiritual progress. We don't know what souls are. We live in a materialistic world, and we're becoming more materialistic. To begin to love, you have to respect the soul. You know what it means? You have to respect something that you can't see, something that's not on your terms, something that you need to be humble. If we saw souls, we would abuse them, because it would be another commodity. Maybe it's good that God is invisible, because you can't abuse him when he's invisible. The whole idea is to submit, is to surrender, is to, in a healthy way, to commit to something that's beyond you. When you love another person, you're committing to a soul that you don't know much about, but you know that it's there, and you know it's valuable, and you know it's not man-made. As soon as you worship man-made things, you can no longer love in the fullest sense of the word. Then you worship that which benefits you, that whatever man is providing for you. So the idea of loving is connected to appreciating a soul. What we can do is become more soulful, look for the soul inside yourself, look for it in others, and act on it. And that is the foundation of the entire Torah. Everything else is commentary. then all the mitzvahs follow, because every mitzvah is meant to reveal a little more of the soul of existence. Food, kosher reveals the soul in food. A mezuzah reveals the soul in your home. Books reveal the soul of your mind. Prayer reveals the soul of your heart. Everything is revealing soul. Soul being the sublime, transcendent element in existence. So I'm very passionate about this, and I can probably go on and on and on. But I know we have curfews to deal with, appointments, meetings to meet, right? What's the expression? Many roads to travel, many people to meet. So, hopefully what I said is sufficient to cover the subject matter. But above all, I wish I can convey my own absolute commitment to doing whatever I can take to fight this battle. And it's a good battle. I'm not talking about fighting negative, it's a fighting positive. We have to be such role models. As I said in the beginning, that's how you Kadisha Shem Shemayim. That's how you sanctify God's name. That when someone looks at you, they see, that's a godly person, that's what I want to be like. Instead of some who distort sanctifying God's name, I'll kill others, and I'm sanctifying God. That's the exact opposite. They desecrate God with that. So that's how we have to feel. And you don't have to be a card-carrying religious person to be sanctifying God. Obviously, someone who looks the part and walks the part carries responsibility. But we're all in that same place. And I don't know who is the most religious person on earth. That's my conclusion. Absolutely do not. It has nothing to do with dress. It has nothing to do with how many rituals you do. Maybe it has to do with how many challenges you have and how you've overcome your challenges. Maybe that one person who has the greatest challenge and does one thing that was the most difficult thing for them to do may be the most godly person on earth. More importantly, it's none of our business. If God wants us to know who's most godly, He'll let us know. So far He hasn't. Which means each of us has a piece of God within us. Each of us has one piece of the puzzle. And your piece is indispensable. And no one else can exist without you. This to me is the message that I would give to all my brethren, my religious and none. We all need each other. And in that sense, everyone is godly. So for you to hurt that person, you're really hurting yourself. You're hurting the part that you need to be a complete picture. It would be like the guy that drills a hole under himself in a boat and says, it's under me, who cares? Yeah, but the whole boat goes down as a result. And vice versa. When you strengthen another part of another limb of a body, the rest of the body gets strong. It's not just that person. Halavai, we should all feel that. So I'll tell you here, I'm committed to this type of approach to life. If all of us commit, even a small room like this, it can have a ripple effect. And as I said, you're either part of the problem or part of the solution. I know I essentially said that 4 times because I don't want anyone to think that you have a third option. There is no third option. Third option, if you're still undecided, it's also part of the problem. Because we have enough undecided people in this world. So let's start a revolution of love, of transcendence. That doesn't mean any compromise of standards. You can communicate all your standards. You do it with love, like you do to your brother or your sister. You can disagree, but you can do it with love. And that is the entire Torah, and everything else is commentary. So no matter what entry point you begin with in the Torah, is all leading to one ultimate destination, which is transcendence. And that's why when we love each other, we rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. It's not some incidental connection. What is the Beis HaMikdash? The divine presence on earth. That cannot exist. The father cannot be with his children when they're fighting with each other. It was an impossibility. I'm not going to let you have a home and be at peace and make believe that everything is nice when you're all at war with each other. What kind of divine presence can there be? We say, God blesses us when we're together as one. So that's how we bring that Shekhinah, that divine presence into our lives, and that's how you bring Mashiach. That's how you rebuild the temple. It's direct result. We connect with each other, the divine can emerge. We don't, the divine simply has nowhere to go, has no home. So that's our responsibility. So may we use this chapter, this period in time of counting of the Omer, as opposed to the students of Rabbi Akiva who got too committed, too passionate about their own opinions, like Rashbi in the 12 years. They couldn't tolerate one another. To recommit and renew our commitment to loving each other, but also spreading a standard, not just loving and saying whatever you do is great. No, love them has expectations. And we should be able to so-called redeem this period of the counting of the Omer and actually celebrate, as we do on Lag BaOmer, the unity of our people And we don't need reminders from our enemies how to get united. We find our own way to do it with much more passion than they ever could do it with hate. And that's what I believe the Meaning for Life stands for, and I hope we all are part of this mission. And it's an honor to sit with kindred spirits and souls. We're all part of this large composition, each of us complementing one another. If any way I can help you in your journey, please call on me. I have Velvel, my dear colleague who works with me right here, who's standing and holding the book on the Omer, and the new book we gave out on Pirkei Avot. If you're interested, Beyond the Letter of the Law, which talks about going beyond the letter of the law, not just doing what's necessary, but when you love someone, even beyond the necessary. And finally, Philip will be giving his class tomorrow evening at 7, so you want information, we can give you that. We'll be here next Wednesday night as we continue our journey. And if you haven't left us your contact information, emails, please do so. Again, it's an honor to speak to loving souls like yourselves, and now we have to spread it out there. We have a large, big city here in New York, plenty of work to do, and may God bless you all in achieving it to the fullest. Thank you so much.